Tessa Harlow was standing at my kitchen counter in a cream silk blouse she'd borrowed from her overnight bag, and she was asking me to zip it up, and I was standing there like someone had quietly removed all the useful parts of my brain. The zipper was small, the kind of small that required actual concentration, which I did not currently have. She had her hair pulled to one side, one hand holding it there, and she was watching me in the dark reflection of the window above the sink, because it was still early enough outside that the glass worked like a mirror. "You've been standing there for 4 seconds, she said. "I'm assessing the situation. It's a zipper, Liam. It's a very small zipper." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Just don't break it. This is the blouse I wear when I need people to take me seriously." "Ah, does it work?" "Better than whatever that face is you're making." I got the zipper moving. "Slow, careful, the way you handle something that belongs to someone else and matters to them even if they won't say so directly." Tessa was like that about certain things. The blouse, yes, but also the way she held herself together when something was wrong. Not fragile. Just careful. Like she'd learned a long time ago that if she held still enough, the hard things would pass without making too much noise. She was a litigation paralegal at Crane & Howell, a firm downtown that handled cases big enough to have their own Wikipedia stubs. Which meant she could organize a deposition binder, draft a motion summary, and quietly make a partner look smarter than he was, all before lunch. Tonight was the firm's annual client appreciation dinner at the Ralston, one of those downtown's hotels with a lobby that made you feel underdressed just walking through the doors. Her name was on the program as a key contributor to 3 major cases this year. Her boyfriend of 2 years, a guy named Grant, had told her 3 days ago that he was relocating to Portland for a job he'd already accepted before mentioning it to her. He had not asked her to come. He had said he thought they wanted different things. He had said this while she was at work, and he was already half-packed. She had not cried about it. Not really. She had shown up at my apartment Thursday night with a bottle of wine she didn't open and spent 2 hours sitting on my kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet, saying things like, "I just feel stupid, not heartbroken. Stupid, like I missed something obvious." That was Tessa. She didn't fall apart. She just got very still, very honest, and waited for herself to catch up to what had already happened. She had asked me to come tonight because she said she needed someone in her corner who wouldn't make her explain herself. I said yes before she finished the sentence. That was usually how it went with us. We had met almost 3 years earlier at a food festival in Wicker Park. I had been waiting in line for a banh mi from a vendor who clearly had more demand than staff. And she had been standing ahead of me in line, reading something on her phone with the expression of someone who had 30 minutes carved out for lunch and was not willing to waste a single one of them. The line moved. She didn't. I said, "I think they called your number." She looked up and said, "I don't have a number, I'm in line." I said, "Then you're ahead of the curve." She stared at me for a second, then laughed in a way that seemed to surprise her, and after that, we talked for the 22 minutes. We were both waiting for food. We never ended up eating separately, because somehow we walked away together and found a bench. After that, we just kept showing up for each other. Texting after long days. Sharing takeout containers on my couch. Helping her move out of her old place in Pilsen. Me carrying boxes while she argued with the elevator. Sitting in the passenger seat while she drove around at night when she couldn't sleep. Me pretending I didn't mind even though I'd been asleep when she called. We called each other best friends because it was the easiest thing to call it. It answered all the questions without asking any new ones. Until tonight, because tonight I was close enough behind her to see the small knot at the back of her neck where she'd clipped her hair, and my hands were steadier than they should have been given how loud everything felt on the inside. I got the zipper to the top and said, "Done," but the word came out quieter than I intended. She looked at me in the window reflection. Not for long. Just a second. Then she straightened up and looked at herself instead. For a moment, she didn't look like the woman who had cross-examined a witness prep summary at 8 in the morning. She looked like someone getting ready for something that mattered, in a way she hadn't decided how to name yet. I should have said something easy, something like "You look great," or "Ready to go," or "Don't forget your coat." Instead, I stayed right where I was and said, "You look really beautiful, Tessa." She went still. Not in a dramatic way, in the way you go still when something reaches you, before you've had a chance to prepare a response. A small breath. Her reflection looked back at mine, in the window glass, and something moved across her face, that she pulled back before I could read all of it. "That," she said quietly, "was not a best friend thing to say. I could have turned it into a joke. I had 2 or 3 ready. I could have blamed it on the lighting, on the blouse, on the fact that she'd just come out of a bad breakup, and I was being supportive. I could have stepped back and put everything exactly where it had been sitting for 3 years. I didn't. Maybe it wasn't," I said. The kitchen was very quiet after that. Same refrigerator hum. Same streetlight coming through the window. Same jacket of hers draped over my dining chair, because she'd said my apartment looked like it was being lived in on a trial basis, and she was trying to help, but the room felt like something had shifted weight, like when a building settles and you don't hear a sound, but you feel it in your feet. Her phone lit up on the counter. She looked at the screen, and her expression switched over, like a light on a different circuit. Controlled. Ready. "It's Diane. Something's already wrong." She picked up. Her voice when she answered was a completely different instrument than the one she'd been using 30 seconds ago. Calm, clear, no edges. Then, she listened, and I watched her face sharpen. "What do you mean the Halverson files weren't printed for table 6? A pause. "No. Don't move the partner's table. Who authorized that layout change? I approved the original diagram." Another pause. Her jaw set. "There's a name card missing for Judge Whitfield." I reached for my jacket off the hook by the door. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, she said. "Tell Mel not to touch anything at the registration table until I get there. And if Leonard is asking questions, tell him the situation is being handled, not that there was a situation." She hung up and looked at me. "Name card for a federal judge," I said. "Halverson files missing. Layout changed by someone who wasn't you. Welcome to law firm hospitality. You sure you don't want to call in a medical emergency? I can fake a lot of symptoms." She was already pulling on her coat. She stopped at my door with her hand on the frame. For just a second she was not in paralegal mode. She looked back at me. Color still in her face, eyes steadier than they'd been a minute ago. "Owen." "Yeah." She held my gaze for a beat longer than she needed to. "If you say something like that again tonight," she said, "I don't know how long I can keep pretending I didn't hear you the first time." Then she opened the door and walked out into the hallway, like she hadn't just tilted the floor sideways. I followed her down to the street, keys in my hand, heart going at a pace that was not really appropriate for a Tuesday in November. Both of us walking toward the Ralston like the dinner was the part we needed to prepare for. It wasn't. The Ralston looked exactly like the kind of place that would charge you $42 for a cocktail, and act like that was a reasonable thing. The entrance was all dark marble and warm brass light fixtures. The kind of lobby that made people instinctively straighten their posture just walking through the revolving doors. A valet stand was set up on the sidewalk. Inside, a jazz trio was playing near the far end of the reception area. Waitstaff moved through the crowd in black and white, carrying trays of things that cost more than my grocery run for the week. Tessa stopped just inside the entrance, took one even breath and became someone else. Not fake, just different. Like a knife that was already sharp going into a sharper edge. Her shoulders settled. Her chin came up. The professional smile was there, and she knew exactly what it was and exactly how to use it. I had seen her do this at smaller work events, a bar review fundraiser, a colleague's retirement party, at a rooftop place in the West Loop. But seeing it here, tonight, right after what had happened at the kitchen window, it landed differently. Because I had just watched her go still, in my apartment in a borrowed blouse, and I knew what was underneath all that composure. Mel appeared out of the crowd with a clipboard and the expression of someone who had been holding it together through willpower alone for the past 40 minutes. She was the firm's event coordinator, mid-30s, efficient in the way only people who've survived multiple disasters quietly become. Okay, worst first, Tessa said. Mel exhaled. Judge Whitfield's card is not at table 3. It is at table 7. Fixable. What else? The Halverson binders for the presentation materials. 4 of them are missing from the welcome packets for the table 6 clients. Also fixable. What's the one you're actually worried about? Mel paused. Mr. Crane's wife and his ex-wife are both at table 9. Tessa didn't blink. Move Mrs. Evelyn Crane to table 4. Seat her next to the Desmond group partners. They like her, she can work the room, and nobody at table 9 will know why the adjustment happened. Mel was already writing, the Halverson binders. I have a digital copy on my phone. Get me a hotel printer and 15 minutes. I stepped slightly closer to Tessa. You need me to stall anyone? She glanced at me. Can you keep a senior partner away from the registration table? For about 10 minutes. What does he look like? 60, silver hair, asks questions like he already knows the answers. I know 3 people like that. I'll figure it out. Mel looked between us and said, he's very useful. Tessa did not smile. She just looked at me for 1 second in a way that I felt in the back of my sternum, then turned back to Mel. Conference room, printer, files. Now. Mel moved. Tessa moved. I went toward the registration table. For the next 45 minutes I learned that being someone's emergency anchor at a law firm client dinner mostly meant staying useful and staying quiet. I redirected a senior partner named Leonard away from the registration area by asking him 3 consecutive questions about the Halverson case that I barely understood, but he was delighted to care that I bought Tessa her 10 minutes. I found the table card for Judge Whitfield in the stack that had been placed face down by someone in setup who'd moved too fast. I carried a box of replacement binders from the service elevator to a side table near the presentation area, without anyone in the room seeming to notice that anything had gone wrong in the first place. Every few minutes, I caught sight of Tessa moving through the room. Handshake here, quiet word there. One hand on Mel's arm pointing toward a doorway. A smooth redirect when a client started angling toward a conversation that would take too long. She made it all look like the plan. I knew better. I knew the slight way her shoulders pulled when she was managing more than one thing at once. The way her hands stayed very deliberate when she was trying not to show that she was calculating. I found her near the presentation, set up around the 40-minute mark, checking something on her phone against a binder. You're doing the thing, I said. She didn't look up. What thing? Standing so straight it looks like you're bracing for impact. I'm standing normally. Your posture just filed a motion I didn't see coming. That made her look up, and the corner of her mouth did something small and involuntary. I genuinely hate that you can tell. No, you don't. She held the look for a second. No, she said, quieter. I don't. For a second the room compressed. Not the way it had in my kitchen, but close enough that I felt the echo of it. Then someone said her name from across the room and she was back. I turned and saw him before she reacted. Grant was standing near the bar in a gray suit that fit too well for someone who'd apparently made all his major life decisions on his own timeline. He looked like someone who photographed well at events. which I suspected was not entirely coincidental. He saw Tessa first, then me, and his expression did a quick recalibration. I didn't know the firm used +1s for these, he said to her, not to me. Tessa's voice was level. Grant. His eyes moved between us again. How long has this been the arrangement? I offered my hand. Owen, I'm a friend. He shook it with the energy of someone doing me a professional courtesy. Sure. The standing by kind, looks like. Tessa said, I need to check on the presentation setup, excuse us. She didn't wait for his response. She walked, and I matched her pace toward the far side of the room. And, once we were through a side door into the hallway behind the banquet space, she stopped and pressed her back against the wall and let herself exhale for the first time in about an hour. He wasn't supposed to be here, she said. His name was on the client list. His firm is. I didn't think he'd come personally. She looked at the ceiling for a second. I should have checked. You want me to occupy him for the rest of the evening? I have more questions about litigation procedures that I completely made up. She laughed. It was short and real, and it loosened something in her face that had been knotted since the lobby. The hallway door opened. Mel came through it quickly, cheeks flushed. The presentation AV isn't connecting to the laptop. Tessa straightened. Which input? HDMI. The hotel tech says it might be the adapter. I have one in my bag. Where's my bag? Table 3. Go get it. I'll be at the podium. Mel left. Tessa looked at me. This is not how tonight was supposed to go. None of tonight was supposed to go the way it's going, I said. She looked at me when I said it. Not like she was processing the surface meaning. Like she was taking the second meaning apart to see if I'd meant it. And she had decided that I had. Owen. Yeah, help me with the AV. I helped with the AV. It took 11 minutes. One adapter, a cable swap, and a conversation with a hotel technician named Ron, who turned out to be extremely knowledgeable, and also extremely willing to share that knowledge at length. But we got it working. The presentation ran clean. The Halverson clients at table 6 had full binders. Judge Whitfield was at table 3 with the correct name card. Mrs. Crane was at table 4, charming, the Desmond group. Apparently in her element. Tessa stood near the back of the room during the remarks, and I stood beside her, and we watched it work the way she had built it to work, which was seamlessly. Which meant nobody in the room would ever know about the hour before. You're good at this, I said quietly. I've had practice surviving my own events. That's not what I mean. She looked at me sideways. I mean, you're good at caring about things. At making things work. At doing all of it without asking anyone to notice. She was quiet for a moment. Grant said I made work my whole identity. Grant moved to Portland without asking you. Something in her face shifted. Not all at once. Just a slow change, like weather moving through. He wasn't entirely wrong, she said. He wasn't entirely right either, and he doesn't get to leave and also leave you with his version of who you are. She looked straight ahead at the room for a long moment. Then, quietly, you're dangerously good at saying the thing that gets past the part of me that's supposed to stay composed. I'm not trying to get past anything. I know. A breath, that's the problem. Grant found me near the dessert station around 9:30. I'd been watching Tessa from across the room while she wrapped up a conversation with two of the partners, and I'd been doing a poor job of pretending that was not what I was doing. Grant had a drink in his hand and the relaxed look of someone who had decided he was the most reasonable person in any given room. She's impressive, he said, following my gaze to Tessa. I'll give her that. She makes it look effortless. It's not effortless. No. He sipped his drink. It costs her. Everything does. You know she doesn't sleep well before events like this. Spends 3 days running scenarios in her head. You'll see it. Little things. She'll go quiet in the middle of a sentence, and you'll think she's listening to you, but she's actually running a checklist. There was something careful in his voice. Not cruelty exactly. Just the specific flatness of someone who had watched a person closely enough to know where to press. She's meticulous, I said. She's exhausting, he said. Not unkind, just final, the way people get when they've decided a verdict. She pours everything into the version of herself that other people need, and then she wonders why she has nothing left at the end of the day. Eventually you figure out that she doesn't actually know how to let someone in. She just knows how to be useful to them. I looked at him. There was a piece of true in what he'd said, and that was what made it dangerous. Tessa did carry too much. She did give more than she asked for. She did sometimes disappear into competence, because competence felt safer than being seen. But that was not a flaw to be handed back to her like a returned gift. You watched her closely enough to know all of that, I said. And you still left without asking her to come with you. He looked at me. That tells me the problem wasn't how much she gives, I said. It tells me you wanted someone who made it easier to leave. He had nothing smooth for that. He looked at his drink, then at the room, then walked back toward the bar. I found Tessa near a small seating area off the main room, between the main banquet space and the hotel corridor. She was standing beside a tall plant, heels off, one hand holding both shoes, looking at her phone with an expression that suggested she was reading something she didn't entirely believe. She looked up when she heard me. "Grant talked to you," she said. "Not a question. He made some observations about your personality." She looked at the floor. He wasn't making things up. I told him that. I moved a little closer, and then I told him that watching someone closely enough to know where they're most vulnerable, and then using that as an exit note, says more about him than it does about you. She didn't respond right away. When she looked up, something in her face was open in a way it hadn't been all evening, not even in my kitchen. Like the thing she used to hold herself together had gotten tired. "You should know," she said carefully, "that he said those things because they work. Because I hear them and I think, he's right. I do close off. I do get lost in being needed. And maybe that's why. Tessa." She stopped. "I have known you for almost 3 years. I have been in your corner through 4 cases. You were sure you'd drop. One apartment that flooded in March. A birthday you spent working and called me from the office at 10 at night. And every Sunday morning when you text me before you're fully awake because you started thinking and wanted someone to think out loud at." She was very still. "You are not hard to know. You are not closed off. You are careful, which is different. And careful is not a character flaw that someone else gets to define for you on their way out the door." She looked at me for a long moment. Then, quietly, "Lo, you make it very hard to stay inside the version of this where we're just friends." I didn't say anything. "I built that version on purpose," she said, "because it felt safe. Because you were the one steady thing I had, and I was terrified of what happened if I said the wrong thing, and you became someone I used to know." A pause. "I need you to understand that it wasn't easy. Calling you my best friend. It was the word I used so I didn't have to use the other ones." The party noise from the main room was very far away. "What other ones?" I said. She looked right at me. "The true ones. Write in the comments. Was Tessa right to keep it a safe label for as long as she did? Or should she have said something sooner? I want to know what you think." The hallway door opened and Mel came through it. She looked at both of us and stopped. "I'm so sorry," she said, in the voice of someone who was not very sorry because she had suspected this was coming. "The photographer wants a closing shot of the event team by the presentation area. He's asking for Tessa and her guest." Tessa did not look away from me. "Tell him yes," she said. Mel blinked. Yes, we'll be right there." Mel made a small sound that was not quite a word and retreated through the door. Tessa finally looked away from me, down at her shoes. She slipped them back on, one at a time without sitting down, which was an impressive feat that I had watched her do before but never thought about until right now. Then she straightened up and reached for my hand. Not quickly, not casually. deliberately, like she had already decided, and was just now doing it. "I'm tired," she said, "of managing the distance between us." I held her hand. "Then don't," I said. The photo happened beside the presentation setup. The two of us and Mel and Leonard, and three of the clients who had stayed late. The photographer told us to move in, and Tessa moved first. And when she settled beside me, she put her hand at my arm, and I put mine at her back. And just before the flash, she tilted her face up toward mine, and looked at me the way she had in my kitchen window. No pretending, no safe distance, no word that covered everything without asking anything. Across the room, I saw Grant watching from near the exit. Then he said something to the person he was with, set down his glass, and left before the hotel staff had finished clearing dessert. For the first time, all evening, nothing was going wrong. Except maybe the version of us that had been keeping everything so carefully in its place. By the time the last guests filtered out, the banquet room was in that in-between state where it still looked like a party, but felt like the day after. Mel was near the registration table with a checklist and her shoes in her hand because she and Tessa had apparently reached a mutual heel removal agreement sometime in the last hour. "Final numbers are strong," Mel said when Tessa came over. "Leonard told me it was the smoothest client dinner they've had in 4 years. He said the presentation was excellent, and the room flow was well managed." She paused. "He did not mention the judge's name card or the Halverson binders or the AV situation." "That's the goal," Tessa said. "Grant left before the coffee service." I noticed. Mel looked at me. "You were helpful and also very calm, which I appreciated." "He's like that," Tessa said quietly. Mel looked between us. She had been working with Tessa long enough to know when to say the minimal thing. "I'm going to collect the remaining table materials, and then I'm going home, and I'm going to watch something on my TV that requires no problem solving." She pointed at Tessa. "You did good tonight. You always do. Go home." She pointed at me. "Take her home." Then she walked away toward the tables. Tessa watched her go. The room was almost empty now. A few hotel staff moving chairs to the side. The jazz trio long gone. "She's known something was different tonight," Tessa said. "Since when?" "Since I told her I was bringing you. And she said, 'You're Owen?' And I said, 'He's not my Owen,' and she said, 'Sure.' Like that meant everything." I looked at her. "You're Owen." She held the look steady. "She's known things about me before I've known them myself. It's deeply inconvenient." We walked out through the lobby. Together. The valet stand was wrapping up. The brass light fixtures were still warm, and the marble floor reflected both of us as we moved through it. Outside, the November air was cold enough to see your breath. I got a cab from the app, while Tessa stood close beside me on the sidewalk, close enough that her shoulder was against my arm. The ride back to her apartment in Lincoln Square took 23 minutes. We talked some, not about anything important. She rested her head back against the seat, and I kept my hand open on the console between us. And after a minute, she put hers over it, her thumb moving slowly over my knuckles. It's like she was testing what it felt like to stop pretending. This was nothing. Every red light lasted longer than usual. At her building I walked her up, the same way I had 100 times. Same elevator with the slow doors. Same hallway with the overhead light that flickered twice before catching. Same neighbor's welcome mat with the small potted succulent that had been there since she moved in. At her door she dug her keys out of her clutch without fumbling, which was impressive, and pushed the door open and stepped inside, and then turned back toward me. "Come in," she said. "I need to ask you something." I came in. She set her clutch on the entry table and stood in the small front hallway in her coat, and her heels and the cream silk blouse, and then she reached back and looked at me over her shoulder. "The zipper," she said. I stepped behind her. This time I wasn't trying to be careful about how I felt. Neither was she. I reached the small zipper pull and worked it down slowly, 1 inch at a time, and the room was very quiet except for the sound of the city coming up from the street below and her breathing. When I reached the bottom, I paused. I stayed close, and I said, "You looked beautiful tonight." She didn't ask what kind of tone that was. She turned around and looked at me for a second, just a second, like she was checking one final time that this was real and not something she had constructed out of 3 years of wanting something she hadn't let herself name. Then she reached up with both hands, pulled me forward by the lapels, and kissed me first. It did not feel like something starting. It felt like something that had been in motion for a long time, and had finally reached the place it was always moving toward. She kissed me the way people do when they've been waiting without admitting to themselves that they were waiting. I kept one hand at her back, careful and steady, and it felt like the most natural thing I'd done in 3 years. When we finally pulled back, she kept her forehead close to mine. Her hands were still at my jacket. "I'm cold," she said. "You're wearing a coat." "I'm still cold, I know. And I'm going to need you to stay for a while." I wasn't planning to go anywhere. She exhaled slowly, like something had been held tight for a long time and was only now allowed to let go. Outside her window, the city was doing what it always did. Lights, traffic, the distant sound of something that might have been music from a bar a block over. All the normal parts of a Tuesday night in Chicago that had no idea what had just happened in this small front hallway. She turned off the entry. "Let's eat." And we went into the kitchen, and she made tea neither of us drank, and we talked until almost 2 in the morning. And at some point she stopped sitting across from me at the table and moved to the chair next to mine, and it felt like the most honest thing either of us had done in 3 years. 6 weeks later, Mel started referring to the night of the Rolston dinner as the zipper incident. She used the term in front of Leonard once, completely on purpose, and then watched him look confused for 30 seconds before Tessa gave her a look that should have been terrifying. And somehow wasn't. Tessa still texted me before she was fully awake. On Sunday mornings, she still ran through every worst-case scenario before every big case. She still went quiet sometimes in the middle of a sentence. And yes, she was running a checklist. And yes, that was how her brain worked. And I had learned that the right move was not to interrupt but to be there when she came back. I still showed up at her work events when she needed another person in her corner. I still carried boxes when something went sideways. We still got takeout on the nights when she was too tired for anything else, and I was the easiest person to call. Except now, when she called, I didn't pretend it was just a friend thing, and she didn't either. We had stopped needing the label that used to cover everything without asking any questions, because we had finally started asking them, and it turned out the answers had been there the whole time. We just needed one very small zipper and one completely honest sentence to let them out.